Ceratosaurus is one of the many icons of the Jurassic period. With its signature horns, it is by far one of the most recognizable dinosaurs ever, appearing in all manner of TV, movies, books, and video games. So it shouldn't be a surprise that it eventually made its way into the Jurassic Park franchise. What is surprising though, is just how little attention it's gotten in the films until now. However, from what we have seen of this mysterious dinosaur, it's quite the interesting creature. So in this video, we'll be doing a rundown into the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World Ceratosaurus. Without further ado, let's get started. In the late 20th century, the genetics company known as InGen rented out several islands for their latest venture, cloning dinosaurs for an amusement park called Jurassic Park, with the island Isla Sorna acting as a factory and testing facility, while Isla Nublar would be host to the park and its attractions. But Jurassic Park would end up becoming a failure, thanks to corporate negligence and a hint of corporate espionage, allowing the dinosaurs to get loose on the island. Not long after, history would repeat itself as a storm would strike Isla Sorna, forcing the island staff to evacuate after releasing the dinosaurs into the wild. Unexpectedly, the dinosaurs flourished on Sorna, despite the genetic countermeasures put in place. InGen, on the other hand, wasn't doing so well, with Jurassic Park driving them to near bankruptcy. It didn't take long for InGen to take notice that these animals were flourishing on Sorna, and out of desperation, decided to take matters into their own hands, resulting in a Tyrannosaurus buck to get free and terrorize San Francisco. As a result of the Tyrannosaurus buck's rampage, countermeasures were taken to prevent this sort of incident from ever happening again, leading to the Gene Guard Act, a bill that would ensure that the dinosaurs cloned by InGen would be given the rights of other endangered species, while making further cloning of dinosaurs illegal. However, after InGen was bought by Masrani Global, who was interested in their own dinosaur cloning projects, such as Jurassic World, InGen scientists would be at it again and clone new dinosaurs in the late 90s, finishing assets from Jurassic Park like the Cretaceous and Ankylosaurus, while creating new assets, including the infamous Spinosaurus, and of course, the Ceratosaurus. Which brings us to its first appearance, when a curious Ceratosaurus investigates the main cast after they had just dug through some Spinosaurus poop for a satellite phone. No, I am not kidding. Once it caught the scent of Spinoturd, decided to play it safe and bail out, with whatever appetite it may have had disappearing along with it. Sometime after, Masrani Global and InGen would continue their work in constructing Jurassic World, and at some point, Ceratosaurus was cloned as a park attraction. Although Jurassic World would prove to be more successful than its predecessor, it would meet the same fate as Jurassic Park, and once again, the animals would get loose and the park would fall. Because dinosaurs and irresponsible theme parks worked out so well the last time, there were at least 2 Ceratosaurus known to have been roaming free after Jurassic World went down. However, their status leading up to the events of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom remain unknown. So what was the InGen Ceratosaurus exactly? First, we need to understand what Ceratosaurus is, or rather was, and for that, we'll need to reference the real animal to get a solid idea. Ceratosaurus was a medium-sized carnivorous theropod dinosaur from the late Jurassic period, easily identifiable with its signature horned face, which earned it the name Ceratosaurus, which means horned reptile. The purpose of these peculiar horns aren't quite understood. However, based on their placement, composition, and development, they were likely for display. Originally discovered in the 20th century based on a nearly complete skeleton, ever since we've found several well-preserved remains of Ceratosaurus, despite being so rare in the fossil record. As a result, we have a fairly decent understanding of what this dinosaur was like, including how successful this animal was, ranging from North America all the way to possibly Africa and even Europe, occupying the niche of medium-sized predators in warm, marshy areas alongside other iconic dinosaurs like Allosaurus, Brachiosaurus, and Stegosaurus. There are 3 recognized species of Ceratosaurus: Ceratosaurus nasicornis, Ceratosaurus magnicornis, and Ceratosaurus dentisculatus. Based on the general anatomy of the Jurassic Park clones, The species shown on screen appear to be Ceratosaurus nasicornis, based on the large nasal horn and smaller lacrimal horns, or the horns over the eyes in layman terms. For the most part, the InGen bred Ceratosaurus maintained many traits of their ancestors, including the facial horn and crests, 4 fingers, and traces of armored scutes. However, the cloning process did cause some mutations in these traits. Starting with the namesake of Ceratosaurus, the clones appear to only have a singular prominent nose horn, with the horns or crests over the eyes seeming to be reduced in comparison. While they are a bit hard to spot and may even seem non-existent, the Ceratosaurus clones do actually retain their brow horns, however. That said, they are covered in skin unlike the real animal. In the real Ceratosaurus, the horns were probably covered in a keratin sheath. Keratin is the protein that makes up your hair, your fingernails, and other structures in other organisms, such as horn, scales, hooves, and feathers. In the case of Ceratosaurus, similar to deer and bovines, the horn wasn't made purely of keratin, but instead surrounded a bone core that will grow on top of, making the horn crests even larger in life, and possibly more colorful. However, in the Jurassic Park clones, it seems that instead of keratin, keratinized skin ended up growing over the crests instead. The nasal horn, on the other hand, has the full keratin thing going on, indicated by the horn being taller than it is on the skeleton. As mentioned before, the horns were covered in a keratin sheath, and as a result, the keratin would grow around the bone and extend the length and shape of the horn. However, these horns still differed from what we usually see in Ceratosaurus, which are normally thin and blade-like. The InGen Ceratosaurus clones developed a more solid, cone-like shape similar to that of rhinos. Nevertheless, these horns were still likely display tools for the InGen Ceratosaurus, using these structures to display to different members of their species, with the horn shape and size likely indicating status, attractiveness to mates, identifying individuals, signaling maturity, or a combination of all of the above. Similar to its real-life counterpart, whose horns we know grew as they aged, and add more support for the display theory. Alongside the fact that these horns and crests were pretty useless in a fight due to being so fragile. The display factor gets added further in the clones thanks to the vibrancy of their colors, with color variation being present in the Jurassic World clones, from the iconic redheads with the yellow bodies and black stripes, to a more bland grayish green. What these colors signal remains unknown. However, there is a possibility that these varying colors could have resulted from genetic tampering. Genetic tampering can cause many changes in clones. After all, cloning isn't perfect. Though we have managed to successfully clone domesticated animals in labs, such as cows, dogs, cats, and sheep, or, pretty much any domesticated mammal, extinct animals, not quite so easy. In fact, almost impossible, due to not only lacking the genetic specimens required for the experiments, but lacking of any significant samples, due to either genetic material not being viable or non-existent. You can't exactly clone a 150 million year old dinosaur when every trace of its DNA has been degraded to dust. We do have samples of non-avian dinosaur DNA from hadrosaurs and an unknown theropod, but these genetic samples aren't viable for cloning. That said, we have managed to clone one extinct animal, an extinct wild goat called the Pyrenean ibex. Although the experiments in cloning began before the Pyrenean ibex was declared extinct, due to the tests being made to test the viability of cloning endangered animals like the Indian gaur, the experiments nevertheless yielded a newborn Pyrenean ibex birthed from a surrogate mother. However, the young ibex died 5 minutes later due to genetic defects in the lungs. These defects are often caused by shrinking chromosomes. You see, as an organism ages, chromosomes, specifically their telomeres, shrink over time, eventually causing the host cell to die. If a clone's genetic donors are of a certain age, the cells of the clone will die quicker, decreasing the lifespan while causing certain genetic instructions not to perform or defect, i.e., the underdeveloped brow horns and the nose horns developing differently. and standing 12 feet high, dwarfing its real-life counterpart. In reality, Ceratosaurus nasicornis was pretty small, a relatively medium-sized theropod dinosaur measuring at only 17 to 20 feet and standing 5 to 6 feet tall. However, there are some specimens of Ceratosaurus dentisculatus that could have reached 28 feet. However, those require more formal description. It is worth noting though that the Jurassic World versions seem to be closer in size to nasicornis. The clones also have a much more robust head than the original animals, reminiscent of the outdated boxy-headed depictions from the 1900s, rather than the modern understandings of the skulls as long and slender. Due to the skull being less gracile and more robust than the original animals, the InGen clones likely had a greater bite force due to the added muscle and reinforcement of the skull, making them much more efficient at holding struggling prey and crushing them in their jaws. Which is a vast improvement when you consider that in reality, Ceratosaurus' jaws were highly susceptible to stress, relying on their arms and claws when on the attack. Speaking of arms and claws, we can see that the wrists are slightly pronated, meaning that the wrists bend downward or inward, something most real theropods can or couldn't do, with the exception of Megaraptorans and possibly Therizinosaurs. Thanks to modern studies of theropod anatomy and comparisons to modern theropods, aka birds, we know that non-avian theropod dinosaurs kept the wrists in a supinary pose, with the hands facing inwards towards each other rather than the outdated bending of the wrists. That said, while the pronation is inaccurate, the posture is actually sorta correct, with the clones actually maintaining a semi-supinary pose, with the hands still facing inwards. If we continue to examine the hands, we can see that the Ceratosaurus still maintains all 4 fingers, a trait characteristic to Ceratosaurus and its relatives. 4-fingered hands is actually a characteristic Ceratosaurus inherits from primitive theropods, a trait that has helped establish Ceratosaurus and its relatives as more primitive theropods in comparison to more advanced ones like Carnosaurs and Coelurosaurs. The final touch on this anatomical cake are the scutes. If we take a look down the back, we can see a row of bony spikes running down their backs called scutes, something we actually know the real Ceratosaurus had, thanks to fossils preserving them, along with additional osteoderms, which were thought to run down the sides to protect them during confrontations with other Ceratosaurus. Which leads us to the behaviors of the InGen clones. The InGen Ceratosaurus seemed to have a preference for smaller prey, with most instances of these animals often going after human-sized prey or at the very least investigating them. Ceratosaurus has been hypothesized to share this particular behavior, given its own size and place in its ecosystem, along with the animals it lived with. This would have allowed Ceratosaurus to keep it from directly competing for larger prey items with other Jurassic carnivores like Allosaurus, which allowed the two to coexist. This is what is called niche partitioning, which is when 2 or more organisms that would typically occupy a similar role instead specialize in different ways to exploit different roles in the ecosystem, such as predators specializing for different types of prey from each other, or herbivores having different adaptations to feed on different types of plants. This allows different organisms to take up different roles in an established niche, and subsequently make it their own, which in turn fuels diversity in an ecosystem. In the case of the InGen Ceratosaurus, it focuses on smaller prey, staying out of the way of larger, more ferocious carnivores like Allosaurus and Carnotaurus that focused on the island's larger grazers, the only exception to the rule being the Tyrannosaurus, who seemed to be generalists that fed on whatever, whenever. Another key detail that remains consistent with the InGen Ceratosaurs is that they also seem to have a preference for hunting at night. This adaptation is likely what allowed the InGen Ceratosaurus to niche partition with the other predators on the island, taking advantage of the day and night cycles and staying out of the way of larger or similar sized predators, while using the low light to stalk prey. However, as a result of this avoidance of larger predators, they're quite skittish when threatened, quick to make tracks at any sign of a larger carnivore, or even scared off by loud noise and the flashing of flares. However, it would seem that a curious mind lies within these curious creatures, with the clones possessing a cautious yet inquisitive nature, with individuals quick to investigate anything that catches their attention, and in many cases moving on their way. a nature one could even interpret as being relatively passive. In conclusion, while the InGen Ceratosaurus may differ visually from its ancestors, they still retain many aspects that made the animal both visually striking and very successful in life. With these unique traits, it's no wonder that InGen decided to clone this Jurassic icon. And that wraps up our deep dive into the InGen Ceratosaurus. Personally, this one is one of my favorite dinosaurs from the franchise thanks to its design, and one of, if not my favorite, medium to large sized theropods, so it was very fun to cover. Special thanks to King Rexy for helping out with the research for this video. Feel free to check out his channel. It's pretty much an archive of clips from all your favorite dinosaur shows, so go ahead, stop in, maybe even give him a sub. And an even bigger thank you to Iron Carnage 101 for the ecology animation with Ceratosaurus and Indominus. Absolutely fantastic animator that deserves your subs. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Tell me your thoughts on the InGen Ceratosaurus in the comments down below, and what dinosaur from the Jurassic Park franchise would you like to see me cover next? That said, thanks for watching, and have a random day.